The frozen throne sat in the heart of the grand hall like a wound that refused to heal. For 3 centuries, it had remained untouched, a monument of ice and ancient magic that repelled anyone who dared approach with genuine intent to claim it. Kings had tried, pretenders had burned, alphas had screamed as frost ate through their flesh in seconds. And yet, every year on the winter solstice, flowers bloomed across its frozen surface, delicate petals of crystalline blue and silver that shouldn't exist, that defied every law of nature. Sprouting from ice that never melted, they would bloom for exactly 1 night, filling the grand hall with a fragrance like snow and starlight, before withering into nothing by dawn. It was beautiful. It was haunting. It was a reminder that the throne was still waiting for someone. Lyra had learned to be invisible. In a world of werewolves where your worth was determined by your designation and the strength of your scent, being an Omega who smelled like nothing was a death sentence. She had been cast out from her birth pack at 16 when she failed to present properly, when her first heat never came, and the elders declared her broken, defective, a waste of resources. For 5 years she had drifted through the territories, taking whatever work she could find, keeping her head down and her wolf suppressed. 6 months ago, she had found employment in the palace gardens, a position so beneath notice that no one questioned the quiet Omega who arrived before dawn and left after dusk. She tended the roses that climbed the eastern walls, the herb gardens that supplied the kitchens, and once a year, she was given the strangest task of all. She was ordered to care for the flowers that bloomed on the frozen throne. The head gardener, an elderly beta named Silas, who had shown her more kindness than anyone in years, had warned her the first time. "The flowers are not meant for hands like ours," he had said, his weathered face creased with something between pity and fear. "They wither at the touch of anyone unworthy. Every year we send someone to clear them before the king makes his attempt, and every year those flowers crumble to dust the moment they are touched. But the task must be done. This year, that task fell to her." Lyra had nodded, accepting the assignment without question, because questioning led to attention, and attention led to discovery, and discovery led to pain. She had climbed the steps to the grand hall in the hours before the solstice ceremony, carrying her gardening tools and a basket, preparing herself to fail at a task that everyone failed. But when her fingers had brushed the first crystalline petal, something impossible happened. The flower did not wither. Instead, it seemed to lean into her touch, its glow brightening, its fragrance intensifying. Lyra had frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting for the pain that surely would come. But there was no pain. There was only warmth spreading. Through her fingertips, a sensation like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. She had touched another flower, then another, and they had all responded the same way, blooming brighter under her hands, as if they recognized her, as if they had been waiting for her. She had spent an hour in that empty hall, surrounded by flowers that should not exist, feeling something stir inside her that had been dormant her entire life. Her wolf, silent and suppressed for so long, had lifted its head and whispered a single word: "Ours." If you are enjoying this story of hidden royalty and impossible magic, please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments what you think Lyra should do when she discovers the truth about her identity. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to life. Lyra had left the flowers untouched that year, reporting to Silas that they had withered before she could properly tend them. He had accepted her lie without question, because who would believe that a nobody Omega could touch what kings could not? She had returned to her tiny room in the servants' quarters, to her narrow bed and her single window that looked out over the gardens, and she had tried to convince herself that it meant nothing, that it was a fluke, an accident, a moment of temporary magic that would never repeat. But her wolf knew better. Her wolf had tasted something ancient and powerful in those flowers, and it wanted more. King Kale ruled the werewolf territories, with a combination of brutal efficiency and calculated cruelty. He had not been born to the throne. His claim came through his mother, a distant cousin of the last true royal line, and through his own ruthless elimination of anyone with a stronger claim. He was an alpha in every traditional sense of the word, powerful and dominant, commanding instant obedience through the sheer weight of his presence. His scent alone could bring lesser wolves to their knees, a suffocating mixture of pine and steel that spoke of violence barely leashed. He had taken the crown 15 years ago, at the age of 25, and he had spent every day since proving that he deserved it through strength and fear. But the frozen throne would not accept him. Every year, on the winter solstice, he would make his attempt in front of the assembled court. Every year, he would place his hand upon the ice, and every year, the throne would reject him, frost crawling up his arm until he was forced to retreat or lose the limb entirely. It enraged him. It humiliated him. It made his rule feel temporary, as if he were keeping the throne warm for someone else. This year, the solstice ceremony was more elaborate than ever. Kale had invited alphas from every major pack, representatives from the neighboring kingdoms, anyone whose opinion mattered in the complex web of werewolf politics. He intended to make a spectacle of his power, to demonstrate that even if the throne would not accept him, his strength was undeniable. The grand hall had been decorated with winter roses and evergreen boughs, candles burning in silver sconces, the floor polished to a mirror shine. And at the center of it all, the frozen throne waited, covered in its annual bloom of impossible flowers. Lyra had been ordered to clear the flowers before the ceremony began, to remove the beautiful reminder of the throne's rejection before the king made his attempt. She had tried to refuse, claiming she was not worthy of such an important task. But Silas had insisted. The other gardeners were too afraid, and someone had to do it. So she had found herself climbing those steps again, her hands trembling, her wolf pacing restlessly inside her mind, as the grand hall began to fill with the most powerful werewolves in the known world. She had intended to work quickly, to touch the flowers just long enough to clear them, and then disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But the moment her fingers brushed the first petal, the same warmth flooded through her, stronger this time, more insistent. The flowers began to glow, their light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she felt something vast and ancient stir beneath the ice. The throne was waking up. Her wolf surged forward with a force that stole her breath. And suddenly Lyra was not a meek Omega trying to stay unnoticed. She was something else entirely. Something that had been sleeping inside her skin for 21 years, waiting for this exact moment. Power rushed through her veins like liquid starlight, and she stumbled, her hand slamming against the throne to catch herself. The ice should have burned her. It should have frozen her solid. Instead, it welcomed her. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The frozen throne erupted with light, flowers exploding across its surface in a cascade of crystalline petals that filled the air like snow. The ice began to crack, not breaking but transforming. Patterns of ancient runes appearing across its surface, glowing with the same silver-blue light as the flowers. And on Lyra's skin, where her palm pressed against the throne, matching runes began to appear, burning their way through her flesh in lines of liquid moonlight. She screamed, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of something locked inside her finally breaking free. Her scent, absent for her entire life, suddenly flooded the hall, and it was not the sweet, submissive fragrance of an Omega. It was snow and wildflowers and ozone before a lightning strike, ancient and powerful and undeniably royal. Every werewolf in the grand hall froze, their instincts screaming at them that something fundamental had just changed, that the balance of power they had accepted for 3 centuries had just been shattered by a nobody Omega who should not exist. King Kale was the first to move. He had been standing on the dais, prepared to make his annual attempt, surrounded by his advisors and guards. When the throne erupted with light, his first instinct had been fury, the assumption that someone was sabotaging his ceremony. But when his scent hit him, when he saw the runes blazing across the skin of the trembling Omega still touching his throne, his fury transformed into something far more dangerous. Recognition. The throne had found its heir. After 300 years of waiting, it had finally recognized someone, and that someone was a female Omega who looked like she wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. His mind raced through the implications with the speed of someone who had spent 15 years navigating political minefields. If she was recognized by the throne, she had a stronger claim than he did. If she had a stronger claim, his entire rule was illegitimate. If his rule was illegitimate, every alpha in this hall would turn on him the moment they sensed weakness. He could not kill her. Not here. Not in front of witnesses who had just seen the throne accept her. But he could control her. He could bind her to him so thoroughly that her claim became his claim. He could make her legitimize his rule instead of destroying it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of forbidden bonds and ancient magic awakening in the most unexpected hearts. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Kale moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had already chosen his prey. He crossed the hall in seconds, his hand closing around Lyra's wrist and pulling her away from the throne. She stumbled, her legs weak, her mind reeling from the power still coursing through her body. The runes on her skin were fading, but not disappearing, leaving behind silver scars that marked her as something other, something important. He pulled her close, his scent washing over her with suffocating intensity, and she felt her wolf snarl in response, refusing to submit even though every instinct screamed that she should. His eyes, pale gold and utterly cold, studied her face with the focus of someone analyzing a puzzle. "Who are you?" he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. His grip on her wrist tightened, just shy of painful, a reminder that he could break her if he chose. She tried to find her voice, but terror had stolen it. She had spent 5 years learning to be nothing, and now she had become everything in the span of a heartbeat. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the hall, hundreds of powerful werewolves staring at her, judging her, calculating her worth. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide, but Kale's grip was iron, and the throne behind her was still humming with awakened power, as if it would not let her leave now that it had finally found her. When she did not answer, Kale turned to address the hall, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "It seems the throne has revealed something unexpected," he announced, his tone carefully controlled, an Omega bearing the marks of the ancient bloodline, a descendant we did not know existed. The hall erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and speculation. How could a royal Omega have gone unnoticed for 21 years? Where had she come from? Was this a trick? A deception? Some elaborate plot to undermine the king's authority? Kyle let the chaos build for a moment before raising his hand for silence. The respect for his power was still strong enough that the hall quieted, though the tension remained thick enough to choke on. "This changes nothing," he declared, and Lyra felt her heart sink, even as her wolf snarled in fury. The throne may have recognized her blood, but blood alone does not make a ruler. She has lived as a servant, unknown and untrained. She knows nothing of leadership, nothing of the responsibilities that come with the crown. But I will not ignore what the throne has shown us. Instead, I propose a solution that honors both tradition and reality. Lyra knew what was coming before he said it. She could see it in the calculating coldness of his eyes, in the way his grip on her wrist shifted from restraint to possession. "I claim her as my mate," Kel announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Through our bond, her bloodline will legitimize my rule, and my strength will guide her inexperience. Together, we will be what this kingdom needs, a true king and his queen, united by destiny and the will of the throne itself." It was a brilliant political move. He would gain the legitimacy he had always lacked while maintaining his power, and she would be trapped at his side, a decorative figurehead with no real authority. The hall erupted into applause because of course it did. The alphas who had gathered here wanted stability, wanted assurance that their carefully balanced alliances would not be disrupted by some unexpected heir. A mating bond between the current king and the newfound princess was the perfect solution. Everyone would get what they wanted. Everyone except Lyra. She finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted, barely audible over the approving roar of the crowd. "I did not agree to this," she said, the words directed at Cale, though she knew he would not care. His smile was cold, his eyes promising consequences if she resisted. "You will," he said, quiet and certain, "because the alternative is far worse. You are untrained, unprotected, and surrounded by wolves who would tear you apart the moment they sensed weakness. You need me, little Omega. You need my protection, my power, my authority. Without me, you would not survive a week in this court." It was a threat and a promise wrapped in reasonable words, and the worst part was that he was not entirely wrong. She knew nothing about being royalty. She had no allies, no resources, no idea how to navigate the deadly politics of the werewolf court. But her wolf, still surging with the power the throne had awakened, refused to accept submission. She pulled her wrist from his grip with a strength that surprised them both, and for just a moment, she let the power show. Her eyes flashed with silver light, the same color as the flowers still glowing on the throne, and her voice came out layered with an authority that did not belong to a frightened Omega. "I will consider your proposal, King Cale, but I make no promises. The throne recognized me, not you. Perhaps that means something." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke to the king that way. No one, especially not an Omega, challenged his authority in front of the entire court. But before Cale could respond, before the shock could turn to outrage, an elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was small and gray-haired, her designation impossible to determine, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear. She wore the robes of a historian, the silver thread marking her as one of the keepers of the old stories, and when she spoke, her voice carried surprising strength. "The girl is correct, Your Majesty," she said, inclining her head respectfully, but not submissively. "According to the ancient laws, the one recognized by the frozen throne has the right to choose their path. They cannot be forced into a bond, cannot be claimed without consent. To do so would be to violate the very magic that protects our kingdom. The throne recognizes worthiness, not just bloodline. If you force her hand, the throne may reject you both." Cale's jaw clenched, fury flashing across his face before he smoothed it into diplomatic neutrality. He could not afford to appear tyrannical in front of so many witnesses, not when his legitimacy was already in question. "Of course," he said, his tone dripping with false courtesy. "I would never force the lady. I merely offer my protection and guidance during this difficult transition. She is free to make her own choice." His eyes, when they met Lyra's, promised that her freedom was an illusion, that he would find ways to pressure her, to manipulate her, to ensure she chose what he wanted. But for now, in this moment, she had won a small victory. She had claimed her right to choose, and the court had heard it. The historian approached Lyra, her weathered hand gentle on the young woman's shoulder. "Come, child," she said, her voice kind. "Let me take you somewhere safe while you process what has happened. You need time to understand what you are, what the throne has awakened inside you." Lyra nodded, grateful for the lifeline, and allowed herself to be led from the grand hall. Behind her, she could feel Cale's gaze burning into her back, could hear the whispered conversations already starting, speculation and schemes being born in the space of heartbeats. She had been invisible for so long, and now she was the most visible person in the kingdom. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But as they left the hall, as the noise faded behind her, Lyra felt something she had never felt before. Hope. The throne had recognized her. The magic had claimed her. And maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to claim it back. If this story is resonating with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do in Lyra's position? And do you think King Cale can truly change, or is he too far gone? Your engagement helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. The historian, who introduced herself as Maven, led Lyra through a maze of corridors to a tower room that smelled of old books and dried herbs. It was cluttered but comfortable, walls lined with shelves holding leather-bound volumes, and glass jars filled with specimens Lyra could not identify. Maven gestured for her to sit in a worn armchair by the fireplace, then set about making tea with practiced efficiency. She did not speak until 2 steaming cups sat between them, and when she did, her words were careful and measured. "You have been hidden your entire life," she said. Not a question, but a statement. Someone went to great lengths to suppress what you are, to make you appear as a broken omega instead of a royal heir. The question is whether it was done to protect you or to neutralize you. Lyra wrapped her hands around the warm cup, trying to stop their trembling. "I do not understand any of this," she admitted, her voice small. "I have never had a heat. I have never had a scent. Everyone said I was defective. How can I possibly be connected to the throne?" Maven settled into the chair across from her. Her expression grave. "The royal bloodline carries magic that other werewolves do not possess," she explained. "The ability to command ice and winter, to communicate with the ancient spirits that guard our lands, to see through deception and illusion. But such power makes royal children targets. 300 years ago, when the last true king disappeared, his entire family was hunted down and killed by those who wanted to seize power. It was assumed that the line had ended, that no heirs remained. But clearly, someone survived. Someone had a child, and that child had a child. And so on, through the generations. And at some point, someone decided that the safest way to protect that precious bloodline was to hide it completely, to suppress the magic, to mask the scent, to make the heir appear as something powerless and beneath notice. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Your lack of heat, your absent scent. They were not defects. They were protections. Someone loved you enough to chain your wolf, to lock away your power, to let you suffer as an outcast rather than die as a target. But now the throne has broken those chains. It has recognized you, and there is no hiding anymore. Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Who would do that?" she whispered. "Who would curse their own child to a life of rejection and loneliness?" Maven's expression softened. "Someone who knew that loneliness was better than death," she said gently. "Someone who understood that you could survive being overlooked, but not being hunted. The question now is what you intend to do with your freedom. King Kale is not a good man, but he is a powerful one. If you refuse him, he will find other ways to control you. If you accept him, you will spend your life as a beautiful prisoner, legitimizing his rule while having no true power of your own. But there is a third option." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You could fight for the throne yourself. You could learn to wield the power that is waking inside you. Gather allies and challenge his claim directly. It would be dangerous. It would likely cost you everything, but it would be yours." The idea was absurd. Lyra had spent her entire life learning to be small, to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible. The thought of standing before the court and declaring herself queen was laughable, and yet her wolf stirred at the suggestion. Interested in a way it had never been before. The throne had recognized her. The magic had chosen her. Maybe she was meant for more than survival. Maybe she was meant to actually live. But could she really challenge a king who had held power for 15 years, who commanded the loyalty of the strongest alphas in the kingdom? Could she learn to be a leader when she did not even know how to be visible? "I do not know if I am strong enough," she admitted, hating how weak the words sounded. Maven smiled, and there was steel beneath the kindness. "Strength is not about power, child. It is about will. The throne did not choose you because you are strong. It chose you because you are worthy. Now you must decide if you believe that." Over the following weeks, Lyra's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Maven became her teacher, guiding her through the history of the royal bloodline, teaching her about the magic that flowed through her veins, helping her understand the political landscape she had suddenly been thrust into. The power that the throne had awakened was wild and unpredictable, surging through her at unexpected moments, ice crystallizing in the air around her when her emotions ran high, winter roses blooming where she walked. She was a disaster, barely able to control the magic, constantly exhausted from the effort of keeping it contained. But slowly, with Maven's patient instruction, she began to understand. The magic was not separate from her. It was her, the truest expression of who she had always been beneath the suppressions and chains. Learning to wield it meant learning to accept herself, all the parts she had been taught to hide and despise. It was harder than any physical training could have been, because it required her to undo 21 years of self-loathing and shame. King Kale did not make it easy. He visited her daily, always with gifts and pretty words, always with the underlying threat of what would happen if she continued to refuse him. He brought her dresses made of silk and fur, jewelry that sparkled with enchantments, promises of power and position if she would just accept his claim. And when gifts did not work, he brought pressure. He ensured that she heard about the instability her existence had caused, the pacts that were questioning his authority, the neighboring kingdoms that saw weakness and opportunity. He made it clear that every moment she delayed was a moment the kingdom grew more vulnerable, and that vulnerability would lead to war, to death, to suffering that would be her fault for refusing to do her duty. It was psychological warfare dressed up as courtship, and it was brutally effective. Lyra felt the weight of it crushing her, the guilt and fear and overwhelming responsibility. But Maven reminded her again and again that a choice made under threat was not really a choice at all, and that Kale's instability was his own creation, not hers. 2 months after the throne's awakening, Lyra was summoned to a private audience with the king. She went because refusing would have been seen as an insult, but she brought Maven with her as a witness and a buffer. Kale received them in his private study, a room that spoke of wealth and power, all dark wood and leather, and carefully chosen art that depicted conquest and dominance. He dismissed Maven immediately, demanding privacy, but the old woman refused to leave until Lyra nodded her permission. When they were alone, Kale's mask of civility dropped. He looked exhausted, lines of tension around his eyes that had not been there before, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with frustration. "You are destroying everything I have built," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Every day you delay, I lose ground. Alphas who swore loyalty are questioning their oaths. Neighboring packs are testing our borders. There have been 3 assassination attempts on you in the last month alone, and if you die before we are bonded, this kingdom will descend into civil war. Is that what you want? Do you want to be responsible for thousands of deaths because you are too proud to accept help?" Lyra met his gaze steadily, her wolf lending her courage she did not naturally possess. "I do not want war," she said quietly. "But I also will not be forced into a bond with someone who sees me as a political tool rather than a person. You speak of duty and responsibility. But what about your responsibility? You have ruled for 15 years through fear and violence. You have created a kingdom where might makes right, where the strong exploit the weak without consequence. The throne rejected you because you are not worthy, and binding yourself to me will not change that." She took a breath, her heart racing, but continued. "If you truly cared about this kingdom, you would step aside. You would allow someone who the throne actually chose to lead. But you will not, because this has never been about the kingdom. It has always been about your pride, your power, your refusal to accept that you are not the hero of this story." The temperature in the room dropped as Kale's control slipped, his alpha presence rolling over her with crushing force. She should have collapsed, should have bared her throat in submission, but the ice magic in her veins responded to the cold, rising to meet his power with her own. Frost spread across the floor between them, a visible line of demarcation. "You think you can rule," he growled, his eyes flashing gold. "You do not know the first thing about leadership. You have never made a decision that affected more than yourself. You have never commanded armies, negotiated treaties, made the hard choices that keep a kingdom alive. You are a child playing at power because an ancient artifact recognized your blood. Blood means nothing without the will to use it." She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the worst part was that he was not entirely wrong. She did not know how to rule. She was learning, but learning was not the same as knowing, and the stakes were life and death. But Maven had taught her something important. Admitting ignorance was not weakness if it came with the will to learn and grow. "You are right," she said, and watched surprise flicker across his face. "I do not know how to rule. I have never led anyone, never commanded respect, never made decisions that affected thousands. But you know what I do know. I know what it feels like to be powerless. I know what it means to be overlooked, dismissed, treated as less than others because of circumstances beyond my control. I know the pain of living in a system that values some lives more than others, based on nothing but designation and birth. And because I know that pain, I will never inflict it on anyone else." She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her power meeting his without flinching. "You rule through fear, because that is all you understand. You believe that dominance equals leadership, that forcing submission makes you strong. But true strength is not about making others bow. It is about lifting them up. It is about creating a kingdom where an Omega does not have to be royal to have worth, where strength is not the only measure of value. The throne recognized me not because I am powerful, but because I understand what it means to be powerless. And that makes me more qualified to lead than you will ever be." The silence stretched between them, tension crackling in the air like lightning. For a moment she thought he might attack her, might let his fury overwhelm his political calculations. But then, something shifted in his expression, something complex and unreadable. "You truly believe that," he said. And it was not quite a question. "You truly think you can change everything, remake the kingdom in your image of justice and fairness?" She nodded. "I have to believe it," she said simply. "Because if I do not, then what was the point of any of this? What was the point of surviving, of being hidden and protected, if I am just going to perpetuate the same systems that made my life hell? The throne chose me for a reason. Maybe it was not about bloodline at all. Maybe it was about finding someone who actually cares about more than power." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then turned away to stare out the window at the kingdom spread below. "You are either going to change everything or destroy everything," he said finally. "I am not sure which is more likely, but I am beginning to think that maybe the throne knew what it was doing after all. Leave a comment below, sharing what you think King Kale is feeling right now. Is he starting to see Lyra as more than a threat? Or is he simply recalculating his strategy? Your insights make these stories richer. The turning point came during the Council of Alphas 3 months after the throne's awakening. It was a gathering held twice a year where the major pack leaders came together to discuss territory disputes, resource allocation, and political alliances. Kale had been using the councils to consolidate his power for years, ensuring loyalty through a combination of rewards for compliance and subtle threats for resistance. This council was particularly tense because Lyra's existence had thrown everything into question, and the Alphas wanted answers. Some supported Kale's proposal of a forced bond, seeing it as the path of least disruption. Others whispered about supporting Lyra directly, seeing opportunity in backing a new monarch who might be more generous with territory and titles. Still others wanted neither and were quietly gathering forces for a potential coup, planning to use the instability to seize power for themselves. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and everyone knew it. Kale had not invited Lyra to the council, assuming she would be content to stay in her tower room learning theory while the real leaders made decisions. But Maven had other ideas. "You must attend," she insisted, her tone brooking no argument. "If you do not, they will make decisions about your life without your input, and you will be bound by those decisions whether you like them or not. Kyle will paint you as weak, as needing his protection, and the Alphas will agree because it serves their interests. You must show them that you are a player in this game, not a piece to be moved." So Lyra had dressed in the finest gown Maven could acquire, a dress of ice blue silk that made her silver scars stand out like badges of honor, and she had walked into the council chamber with her head held high, and her wolf prowling just beneath her skin, ready to fight if necessary. The reaction was immediate. The chamber fell silent as she entered, every Alpha turning to stare at the Omega who had dared intrude on their gathering. Kyle, seated at the head of the long table, looked furious, but he could not order her removed without appearing tyrannical in front of the very alphas he needed to impress. "What are you doing here?" he said, his voice cold. "This is a closed session." Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "I am here because decisions are being made about my future, and I have a right to be part of those discussions," she said clearly. "The throne recognized me. That makes me a relevant party to any conversation about leadership in this kingdom." An older alpha with gray streaked hair and a scar across his face laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "The Omega thinks she has rights," he said to the room at large. "Next, she will be demanding a seat at the table and a vote on pack matters. Know your place, girl. This is a discussion for leaders, not decorative heirs." The insult should have stung, but Lyra had endured far worse in her years as an outcast. She turned to face the alpha directly, her power rising in response to his dismissal. "My place," she said, her voice layered with the authority the throne had given her, "is wherever I choose to stand. You may not recognize me as a leader, Alpha Marcus, but the throne did. The magic did. The ancient powers that have protected this kingdom for millennia looked at all of you and chose me. So perhaps the question is not whether I belong in this room, but whether any of you do." The temperature dropped as ice began to form in intricate patterns across the stone floor, spreading from where she stood in delicate fractals that glittered in the candlelight. It was a display of power she had been practicing with Maven, a way to prove that she was not helpless, not dependent on anyone's protection. The alphas shifted uneasily, their wolves, responding to the ancient magic with instinctive wariness. Kyle stood, his presence filling the room, and for a moment Lyra thought he would side with the other alphas and throw her out. But instead, he gestured to an empty chair. "If the lady wishes to observe, she may," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "But this is still my council, and the discussion will proceed as planned." It was a small concession, but it was more than she had expected, and she took the offered seat before he could change his mind. The council resumed, discussions of territory and resources and political maneuvering that made her head spin with their complexity. But she listened carefully, noting who allied with whom, who held grudges, who valued stability over personal gain. She was learning, absorbing the dynamics of power that Maven's books could not fully capture. And slowly, she began to understand something crucial. These alphas did not respect Kale because he was strong. They feared him, yes, but respect and fear were not the same thing. They followed him because the alternative was chaos, but they would abandon him the moment someone stronger appeared. Loyalty built on fear was no loyalty at all. Halfway through the council, the discussion turned to her. Alpha Darius, a younger wolf with political ambitions, raised the question that everyone was thinking. "We have been dancing around this issue for months," he said bluntly. "What are we going to do about the heir? She cannot remain unmarked and unbonded indefinitely. It creates instability, makes us look weak to our enemies. Either she accepts King Kale's claim, or we need to discuss alternative solutions." The way he said alternative solutions made it clear he meant either marrying her to someone else for political advantage or eliminating her entirely. Several alphas nodded in agreement, and Lyra felt her wolf snarl in response to the casual discussion of her fate, as if she were not sitting right there. Before she could speak, Kyle cut in, his voice sharp. "The lady has made her position clear," he said. "She will not be forced into any bond. As her king, I respect that choice." But he could not resist adding, "Though I continue to hope she will see the wisdom of accepting protection from someone who has kept this kingdom stable for 15 years. Lyra had had enough of being discussed like an object. She stood, drawing every eye in the room, her power humming beneath her skin. "You speak of stability," she said, addressing the room at large. "But what kind of stability are we talking about?" "Stability that keeps the strong in power and the weak in chains. Stability that says an Omega has no value unless claimed by an Alpha. Stability that measures worth by violence and dominance. Is that really the kingdom you want to preserve?" She turned slowly, meeting the gaze of each Alpha in turn. The throne rejected King Kale because his vision of leadership is fundamentally flawed. He rules through fear and expects gratitude for not being worse. But I have spent my life on the other side of that system. I know what it means to be deemed worthless, to be cast out and left to survive on scraps. And I am telling you that a kingdom built on the suffering of its weakest members is not stable. It is rotting from the inside. And one day, it will collapse. The only question is whether we have the courage to rebuild it before that happens. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke to the council this way. No one, especially not an Omega, challenged the fundamental structures of their society. But Lyra was done being quiet, done accepting that this was just how things were. If the throne has chosen me, then I have to believe it was for a purpose beyond just bloodline, she continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I believe it chose me because the old ways are dying, and something new needs to be born. I am not asking you to follow me out of fear or duty. I am asking you to consider whether the system we have is truly worth preserving, or whether we owe it to the next generation to be brave enough to build something better. It was a risk, a huge risk, to frame her claim not as a grab for power, but as a call for transformation. She was betting that at least some of these alphas were tired of the constant political maneuvering, the violence, the fear that defined their leadership. She was betting that someone in this room still remembered what it meant to lead with vision, rather than just force. Alpha Marcus, the one who had mocked her earlier, rose to his feet with deliberate slowness. "Pretty words, girl," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But words do not keep borders secure. Words do not feed packs through harsh winters. Words do not stop neighboring kingdoms from seeing weakness and attacking. You speak of building something better, but you have no idea what it takes to keep a kingdom functioning. You are a child with ideals and no understanding of reality." He moved closer, using his size and presence to intimidate, and his scent rolled over her with alpha dominance. "You want us to risk everything we have built on your vision of fairness. Why should we? What have you ever done except survive?" Lyra felt her wolf rise to meet his challenge, felt the ice magic respond to her surge of emotion, but she forced it down. This was not a moment for power displays. This was a moment for truth. "You are right," she said quietly, and the admission surprised him. Enough that he stopped advancing. "I have done nothing except survive. I have never led armies or negotiated treaties or made life and death decisions. But surviving in a system designed to destroy me required its own kind of strength. It required hope when there was no reason for hope. It required holding on to my humanity when everything around me said I was worthless. It required believing that life could be better, even when all evidence pointed to the contrary." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "You call me a child, but I have seen more of the dark underbelly of this kingdom than you ever will from your position of power. I know what it means to go hungry because no one will hire an Omega without a pack. I know what it means to be hunted for sport because some alpha decided I was fair game. I know what it means to watch good people break under the weight of a system that does not care whether they live or die. So yes, I am asking you to risk what you have built, because what you have built is rotten, and pretending otherwise will not make it true." The room exploded into chaos, alphas shouting over each other, some in support and some in outrage. But through it all, Lyra remained standing, her expression calm, her power held in check but visible in the frost patterns that continued to spread across the floor. She had said her piece. She had thrown down the gauntlet. Now she would see who had the courage to pick it up. Kale watched her from across the table, his expression unreadable, and for just a moment their eyes met. She saw something in his gaze that had not been there before. Not respect, not quite, but recognition. She was not going to disappear. She was not going to be controlled. She was going to fight for what she believed in, and he was going to have to decide whether to stand with her or against her. If you are enjoying this journey of transformation and challenge, please hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear about standing up for what is right, even when the whole world tells you to sit down. Your support means everything. The council ended without resolution, But something fundamental had shifted. Word of Lyra's speech spread through the kingdom like wildfire, carried by servants and guards who had overheard, embellished with each retelling but maintaining the core truth. The Omega heir had stood before the most powerful alphas in the kingdom and called them out for their complacency, their cruelty, their willingness to preserve a broken system because it benefited them. Common wolves, Omegas and Betas, who had spent their lives accepting that their lot was simply the way of things, began to whisper about change, about the possibility that someone in power might actually care about their suffering. It was dangerous. It was revolutionary. And Kyle watched it unfold with the growing realization that Lyra was far more of a threat to his rule than he had initially understood, not because she wanted his crown, but because she wanted to dismantle everything the crown represented. She was not trying to take his power. She was trying to make power itself mean something different. He found himself thinking about her constantly, and it infuriated him. She was an obstacle, a complication, a threat that needed to be neutralized. But she was also unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Most wolves bent under pressure, but she seemed to grow stronger the more he pushed. Most people could be bought with promises of wealth and status, but she appeared genuinely uninterested in personal gain. She wanted to change the world, and she actually believed she could do it. It was naive. It was impossible. It was also strangely compelling in a way he did not want to examine too closely. He had built his rule on the foundation of his alpha ancestors, powerful wolves who took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. He had never questioned whether that was right, only whether it was effective. But Lyra made him question everything, and he hated her for it, even as he found himself unable to stop watching her, unable to dismiss her arguments as easily as he wanted to. The assassination attempts intensified. 4 more in as many weeks, each more sophisticated than the last. Someone wanted Lyra dead before she could build real support, and Cale found himself ordering his personal guards to protect her, telling himself it was because her death would cause the civil war he wanted to avoid. But late at night, when he could not sleep for thinking about ice-blue eyes and a voice that refused to submit, he admitted to himself that the real reason was simpler and far more complicated. He could not let her die, not because she was politically useful, but because something about her mattered in a way he did not fully understand. It felt uncomfortably like the early stirrings of a true mate bond, the kind that happened once in a millennium, the kind that transcended political calculations and forced transformations. He had spent 15 years believing he was above such vulnerabilities, that bonds were tools to be used rather than forces to be felt. But his wolf disagreed. His wolf wanted to protect her, to prove himself worthy of her, to earn the trust she refused to give freely, and that terrified him more than any army ever could. Lyra, for her part, was exhausted. The political maneuvering, the constant threat of death, the overwhelming responsibility of trying to be a symbol for people she had never met. It was crushing her under its weight. She had nightmares about failing, about making the wrong choice and watching the kingdom descend into violence, about being revealed as the fraud she sometimes believed herself to be. Maven tried to reassure her, reminding her that transformation took time, that expecting herself to fix centuries of injustice overnight was unreasonable. But Lyra had tasted what it meant to matter, and she could not go back to being invisible. Even if it killed her, she had to try. She spent her days learning statecraft and magic in equal measure, her evenings meeting secretly with common wolves, who brought her stories of the kingdom's underbelly, and her nights barely sleeping, her mind racing through strategies and possibilities. She was burning herself out, and everyone could see it except her. It was Cale who finally forced her to stop. He found her in the library one night, long after midnight, surrounded by books and maps and half-written proposals for reform. She had fallen asleep at the table, her face pressed against an open volume, dark circles under her eyes speaking to weeks of insufficient rest. He should have woken her and sent her to bed. Instead, he found himself standing there, studying her in a moment when she was unguarded and vulnerable. She looked young like this, younger than her 21 years, and he was struck by the unfairness of what had been asked of her. She had been shaped by cruelty and neglect, hidden away, and then suddenly thrust into the center of a political maelstrom, expected to save a kingdom she had barely been allowed to be part of. And instead of breaking, instead of giving up or accepting the easier path he had offered, she was fighting. Not for power or prestige, but because she genuinely believed things could be better. It was the kind of idealism he had lost decades ago, if he had ever had it at all. He gathered her carefully, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms despite the power that hummed beneath her skin. She stirred but did not wake as he carried her through the quiet corridors to her chambers, and he tried not to think about how right it felt to hold her, how his wolf settled in satisfaction at having her close. He laid her in her bed, pulling the covers over her with an unfamiliar gentleness, and as he turned to leave, her hand caught his wrist. Her eyes opened, silver and alert despite the exhaustion, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rough with sleep. "Why do you keep protecting me when I am trying to destroy everything you have built?" He could have lied. He could have given her a political answer about preventing civil war and maintaining stability, but something about the darkness and her unguarded question pulled truth from him. "Because you are right," he said quietly, "about all of it. I have ruled through fear, because it was what I knew, what I was taught, was strength. But watching you, listening to you, I am beginning to see that fear and respect are not the same thing, that dominance and leadership are different. You make me question everything I thought I knew about power, and I hate it. But I also cannot seem to stop. Maybe the throne was right to reject me. Maybe I am not worthy. But if there is any chance of redemption, any possibility of becoming someone who deserves to lead, I think it starts with accepting that you are better than me." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest in a way Cale had not been in years. Lyra's grip on his wrist tightened slightly, her expression complex. "I do not want to destroy you," she said softly. "I want to change the system. You could be part of that change. You have the loyalty of the military, the respect of the alphas even if it is built on fear. You understand how the kingdom functions in ways I am still learning. We do not have to be enemies." He laughed bitterly. "You say that, but everything you want requires dismantling everything I am. I built my power on dominance, on being the strongest in the room, on making examples of anyone who challenged me. If I accept your vision, I have to admit that I was wrong for 15 years, that I hurt people unnecessarily, that I am the villain in this story, not the hero. How do you ask someone to accept that about themselves?" Lyra sat up, still holding his wrist, her silver eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window. "I do not think you are a villain," she said carefully. "I think you are a product of the system you were born into, the same as all of us. You were taught that strength means dominance, that showing compassion is weakness, that the only way to be safe is to be feared, and you survived by internalizing those lessons. But surviving is not the same as living, and leading through fear is not the same as being a leader people would actually choose to follow." She paused, gathering her courage. "The real question is whether you are willing to do the hard work of becoming something different. Not because I am forcing you, not because it is politically expedient, but because you actually believe it is right. Redemption is not about grand gestures. It is about consistent choice, day after day, to be better than you were before. It is about accepting responsibility for harm you have caused and working to repair it. It is uncomfortable and painful, and there is no guarantee that people will forgive you. But the alternative is continuing to be someone you are slowly realizing you do not actually want to be. So the question is not whether I think you are worthy. The question is whether you want to become someone who is." The words hit Cale like a physical blow, stripping away his defenses and forcing him to confront truths he had been avoiding. He had told himself for years that he was doing what was necessary, that his cruelty was justified by the stability it brought, that he had no choice but to be the monster others feared. But Lyra was offering him something he had never considered. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but the possibility of change, the chance to be something more than what he had been. It should not have mattered. He should not have cared what one Omega thought of him. But somehow, her opinion had become the only one that did matter. She saw him clearly, all his flaws and failures, and she was still saying that he could choose to be better. Not that he was redeemed, not that he was forgiven, but that the path forward existed if he had the courage to take it. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If you believe in stories about second chances and transformation, please subscribe to this channel and share your own thoughts about redemption in the comments below. Can people truly change, or are we forever defined by our worst actions? What are you proposing? He asked. Finally, his voice rough. An alliance, a true partnership, not a forced bond, but a choice to work together. You help me implement reforms. Use your authority and resources to support changes that benefit everyone, not just the powerful. In return, I legitimize your rule not through bloodline, but through joint leadership. We create a council system where power is distributed, where decisions are made collectively rather than by decree. We prove that strength and compassion are not opposites, that it is possible to lead with both. It was a radical proposal, one that would require him to give up the absolute authority he had fought so hard to claim. But it was also the only path forward that did not end in civil war or assassination. And maybe, just maybe, it was what he had been looking for all along without knowing it. A way to stop being the king he had thought he had to be, and start becoming the leader he might actually want to be. He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found only exhausted sincerity. You really believe we can do this? He said. You really think I am capable of change? I have to believe it, she replied. Because if I do not, then there is no hope for any of us. Everyone deserves the chance to choose who they become, even those who have made terrible choices in the past. You have hurt people. You have built a system that caused suffering. Those are facts. But they do not have to be your entire story. You can choose differently starting right now. And maybe, over time, you can become someone who the throne would actually accept. Not because of my bloodline, but because you earned it. It was the hardest offer anyone had ever made him. Not love, not even really trust, just the possibility of earning both. And standing there in the moonlit chamber, holding the wrist of an Omega who should have been beneath his notice, but who had somehow become the most important person in his world, Cale made a choice. Not the easy choice, not the one that maintained his power and pride, but the right one. All right, he said quietly. Let us try. Let us see if a monster can learn to be a man. But you have to promise me something in return. When I fail, because I will fail, I am going to make mistakes and fall back into old patterns. You have to be willing to call me out. Do not let me hide behind excuses or political necessity. Hold me accountable, because I do not trust myself to do this alone. Lyra's expression softened, and she released his wrist, only to take his hand properly, her small fingers intertwining with his. I promise, she said. We will fail together and learn together, and maybe, eventually, succeed together. But we start tomorrow. Right now, you need to let me sleep, because I am exhausted, and your dramatic revelations are lovely, but also happening at midnight. Despite everything, Cale laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. You have the strangest timing, he said, shaking his head. Fine. Sleep. Tomorrow we begin the impossible task of saving a kingdom and possibly ourselves. He left her room feeling lighter than he had in years, and for the first time since the throne had rejected him, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could become worthy after all. The months that followed were the hardest either of them had ever experienced. Transforming a kingdom was not a matter of declarations and decrees. It required dismantling centuries of tradition, challenging entrenched power structures, and convincing people that change was necessary, even when it made their lives temporarily harder. Cale and Lyra worked together, forming an unlikely partnership that confused and irritated the court in equal measure. He used his authority to push through reforms that he would have dismissed as weakness, months earlier. Laws protecting omegas from forced bonding, redistribution of resources to struggling packs, creation of councils where common wolves had a voice in governance. Every change was met with resistance from alphas who benefited from the old system, and Kale had to navigate the delicate balance between using force when necessary and demonstrating that cooperation could be more beneficial than domination. It was exhausting, politically dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Lyra, meanwhile, worked on the cultural transformation that laws alone could not achieve. She held public forums where common wolves could share their grievances directly, creating a space for voices that had been silenced for generations. She established educational programs so that omegas and betas could learn skills beyond their traditional roles. She used her growing influence to challenge the casual cruelty that passed for normal in werewolf society, making it clear that strength did not require putting others down. She was everywhere, tirelessly advocating for those who could not advocate for themselves, and slowly, painfully, the kingdom began to shift. Not everyone supported the changes. There were protests, assassination attempts, entire packs that threatened to secede rather than accept the new order. But there were also stories of omegas walking freely without fear, of alphas choosing to lead through inspiration rather than intimidation, of a kingdom beginning to remember that they were strongest when they lifted each other up. Through it all, Kale and Lyra's relationship evolved in unexpected ways. They fought constantly, their different perspectives clashing over strategy and implementation. But the arguments were productive, each challenging the other to think beyond their assumptions, to consider viewpoints they would have dismissed before. He taught her about political realities and the art of compromise. She taught him about empathy and the importance of listening to those without power. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to trust each other. Not blindly, but with clear-eyed understanding of each other's flaws and strengths. And beneath the political partnership, something deeper was growing. The bond that Kale had felt stirring that first night intensified, not through magical compulsion, but through genuine connection. He found himself seeking her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with governance, sharing stories from his past that he had never told anyone, allowing himself to be vulnerable in her presence because she had proven that she would not use that vulnerability as a weapon. Lyra felt it. Too, the way her heart lifted when he entered a room, the way she had started to see past his carefully maintained authority to the person beneath who was genuinely trying to become better. She had spent so long viewing him as the enemy that it was disorienting to realize she was starting to care about him, not as a political ally, but as a person she was growing to respect, and maybe even love. But she refused to rush, refused to let the bond develop faster than trust allowed. They had both been shaped by trauma and survival, and healing required time and patience. So they moved slowly, building a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership before allowing anything more intimate to develop. It was not the sweeping romance of fairy tales, but it was real, and that made it infinitely more valuable. 1 year after the throne's awakening, on the anniversary of that world-changing moment, Kale and Lyra stood together before the frozen throne. They had called a gathering of the entire court, every alpha and beta and omega who could attend, to witness what they hoped would be a new beginning. The reforms they had implemented were working, slowly transforming the kingdom from one built on dominance to one aspiring toward justice. But there was still resistance, still those who believed that the old ways were better, who saw compassion as weakness and equality as threat. They needed a symbol, something that would demonstrate beyond question that the throne itself supported what they were building together. Lyra approached the throne first, placing her hand upon the ice as she had that first night. The throne responded immediately, flowers blooming in cascades of silver and blue, her royal marks glowing with ancient power. The court had seen this before, and while it was still impressive, it was no longer shocking. Then Kyle stepped forward, and the hall fell silent. He had not attempted to touch the throne since that night, had not tested whether his transformation was sufficient to earn the throne's acceptance. He met Lyra's eyes, saw her encouragement there, and placed his hand beside hers on the frozen surface. For a breathless moment, nothing happened, and he felt the familiar crush of rejection beginning. But then Lyra's power reached out, wrapping around his like an embrace, and the throne responded not to him alone, but to them together. Gold light joined the silver and blue, different from the royal magic but complementary to it, and new flowers began to bloom, a hybrid of winter roses and summer strength. The throne was accepting them as partners, as joint leaders, as proof that change was possible when people chose to work together rather than against each other. The runes that had marked only Lyra's skin began to appear on Kale's as well, not identical but harmonious, two halves of a whole that was stronger together than either could be alone. The court erupted into cheers, not the polite applause of political necessity, but genuine celebration, because what they were witnessing was not just the acceptance of a king and queen, but the validation of everything they had been working toward. The throne, that ancient arbiter of worthiness, was saying that compassion and strength could coexist, that redemption was real, that systems could change if people had the courage to change them. Kale turned to Lyra, his expression open in a way it had not been since he was young, and saw his own wonder reflected in her eyes. "We did it," he said softly, barely audible over the roar of the crowd. "You did it," she corrected gently. "You chose to become someone worthy. The throne is just recognizing what I've been seeing for months now." He shook his head. "We did it together," he insisted. "You showed me what was possible, but I had to choose to walk the path. And I could not have done it without you holding me accountable, believing I was capable of more than I believed myself. That is what partnership means. Not one person changing the other, but both of us becoming better together." Please share this story if it has moved you, and let me know in the comments what moment resonated most with you. Stories of transformation and hope are what we need more of in this world, and your engagement helps spread that message. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the court had dispersed, Kale and Lyra found themselves back in the tower room where Maven had first taught her about her heritage. The old historian had passed away 3 months earlier, peacefully in her sleep, but her presence still lingered in the books and memories she had left behind. They sat together by the fireplace, exhausted but content, watching the flames dance. "I have been thinking," Lyra said softly, "about what comes next. We have made progress, but there is still so much work to do. Pacts on the borders are still resistant to change. The neighboring kingdoms are watching to see if our experiment will fail, and there are wolves in our own court who smile to our faces while plotting behind our backs. Some days I feel like we are trying to hold back an avalanche with our bare hands." Kyle reached out, taking her hand in his thumb tracing the silver scars that marked her as chosen. "Some days it will feel like that," he agreed. "Change is not a single moment of triumph. It is endless small battles, constant vigilance, the exhausting work of defending progress against those who prefer familiar suffering to uncertain improvement. There will be days when we fail, when we make the wrong choice, or move too slowly, or push too hard. There will be wolves who hate us for what we are building, who see kindness as threat and equality as loss. But there will also be moments like today, when we see proof that what we are doing matters. When an Omega walks into a council meeting without fear, when an Alpha chooses to listen instead of dominate, when a child grows up believing they have worth regardless of their designation. Those moments make the struggle worthwhile. Lyra leaned into him, allowing herself the comfort of his presence, and felt his arm wrap around her shoulders with gentle strength. "I am glad you are here," she admitted. "I am glad the throne gave us both a chance, gave me the opportunity to show you that power and compassion are not opposites. For a long time I was angry at you for the pain you caused, the system you upheld, but watching you choose to change, seeing the work you put into becoming better, it has taught me something important. That no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to do the hard work. That transformation is possible at any moment if we have the courage to begin. You are not the person you were a year ago, and I am not either. We have both grown, both been shaped by this shared struggle, And I think that is what true partnership means. Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone willing to grow beside you. Kyle pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable months ago. I love you, he said simply. Not because of the throne, not because of political necessity, but because you saw something in me worth saving when I had given up on myself. You held me accountable and believed in my capacity for change even when I did not. You taught me that strength is not about dominance, but about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit fault, to keep trying even after failing. You make me want to be worthy of the faith you placed in me, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Lyra turned to face him fully, her silver eyes luminous in the firelight. I love you too, she said. Not because you are perfect, because you are not, but because you chose to become someone who actually deserves to lead. Because when given the choice between comfortable cruelty and difficult compassion, you chose compassion. Because you proved that redemption is real, that people can change if they want it badly enough. You are my partner in every sense of the word, and I cannot imagine building this better world with anyone else. They kissed then, soft and sweet, and full of promise. The bond between them settling into place not through magical compulsion, but through genuine choice and hard-won trust. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, and through the window, they could see winter roses blooming in the gardens below, thriving in the cold, because that was their nature, to bloom in harsh conditions, to bring beauty to frozen places, to prove that even in winter, life and growth were possible. It was a perfect metaphor for what they were building, and as they sat together in comfortable silence, both felt the weight of hope, not blind optimism, but the grounded belief that through consistent effort and mutual support, they could create something better than what had come before. The epilogue of their story came 5 years later. The kingdom had transformed in ways that once seemed impossible. The council system was fully implemented, with representatives from every designation and pack having genuine voice in governance. Laws protecting the vulnerable were not just written, but enforced, with consequences for those who violated them regardless of their status. Educational programs had created opportunities for wolves to grow beyond their traditional roles, and a new generation was being raised to believe that worth came from character rather than designation. There were still challenges, still resistance, still moments of backsliding, but the direction was clear and the progress undeniable. The kingdom had become a place where an Omega could dream of leadership, where an Alpha could choose compassion, where strength and kindness were no longer seen as opposites, but as partners in the work of building something worth protecting. Kale and Lyra ruled together, not as king and subject, but as equal partners, and their bond had only strengthened over the years. They had 3 children, each of whom would grow up knowing that they were loved, not for their designation or their power, but for who they chose to be. The eldest, a daughter with her mother's silver eyes and her father's determination, would one day lead with the combined wisdom of both parents, proving that the future could be brighter than the past. The frozen throne no longer sat alone in the grand hall. Instead, 2 thrones now stood side by side, one of ice and one of oak, symbolizing the partnership that had transformed a kingdom. And every year on the winter solstice, flowers still bloomed, but now they were accompanied by music and celebration, a festival that marked not rejection, but acceptance, not waiting, but arrival. The throne had found its heirs, and they had proven worthy not through dominance, but through the consistent choice to build something better together. Standing in the grand hall on the 5th anniversary of their joint coronation, surrounded by wolves from every pack and every background who had come to celebrate how far they had traveled, Lyra thought about that frightened girl who had touched the throne and changed everything. She had been so terrified, so certain she would fail, so convinced that she was not enough. But she had learned that strength was not about being perfect or powerful. It was about showing up day after day, making the hard choices, holding yourself and others accountable, and refusing to give up even when the path ahead seemed impossible. She had learned that transformation was not a single moment, but a lifetime of moments, each choice building on the last, creating something beautiful and strong through consistent effort and genuine care. Kyle squeezed her hand, pulling her from her thoughts, and she smiled up at him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing to walk this path with me, for proving that redemption is real, for becoming someone who makes this kingdom better simply by being in it." He smiled back, and in his eyes, she saw the reflection of their shared journey, the struggles and triumphs, the failures and victories, the endless work of building something worth believing in. "Thank you for seeing potential in a monster and having the patience to help him become a man," he replied, "for teaching me that true strength is not about power over others, but power used in service of others, for showing me that there is no shame in changing your mind, in admitting fault, in choosing to be better than you were. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." As the celebration continued around them, as wolves danced and laughed and shared stories of the progress they had made together, the frozen throne glowed with gentle light, flowers blooming eternal across its surface. It was no longer waiting. It had found what it sought, not in bloodline alone or power or dominance, but in two people who had chosen to become worthy together, who had proven that even the coldest winter could give way to spring if you were willing to do the work of planting seeds and nurturing growth, who had demonstrated that true leadership was not about ruling over others, but about creating space for everyone to flourish. The throne had chosen well, and the kingdom would remember their legacy for generations to come, a legacy not of conquest or dominance, but of transformation and hope, of two people who loved each other and their kingdom enough to do the hard work of making both better. And in that legacy, countless wolves would find the courage to bloom in their own frozen places, to believe that change was possible, and to choose compassion over cruelty, growth over stagnation, hope over despair, because that was what true strength looked like. Not the power to dominate, but the courage to lift others up and grow together toward something beautiful.